Welcome to episode 148 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and producer Johnny Pham. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Instagram. First time, maybe not too many more times for this. We'll see how long we keep this specific StreamYard, but it is great to be here, guys. Johnny, I know yesterday was a big day. NCAA Dynasty got started. Couple big user wins last night, and Dalton also played a couple of contests last night.
I won, and I lost.
Yep, that is
Ups
accurate.
And downs of life. And you guys haven't faced Turtle Hell in that Dynasty League yet. When you play against Turtle Hell in that offense, we'll see how you do.
Okay, we'll wait. We will wait for that day whenever that may come. But yeah, NCAA Dynasty, that was a fun start. Ready for more games to keep rolling.
You know, I think the NFL could really use some games because right now it just feels like all we're getting is injuries. And we're going to talk about a lot of those to start off the show here. But later on, we've got some more uplifting and fun topics, I would say. We'll have the train camp news to start us off. But then, Dalton, we're giving our sleepers. We're giving our breakouts. If I were a prepared host, I would have pulled up the list from last year. I will do that maybe in the meantime as we talk about other stuff. I think last year the sleepers and breakouts were pretty okay, if I remember right. It was the my guys where things really went off the rails, which we've had some hits there last year, maybe more misses, but we'll try and keep up the pretty good track record, I think, for sleepers and breakouts. But first, where we're going to start is in Minnesota, which seems like it's been the center of a lot of news the last couple of days. We got the news initially that JJ McCarthy was going to have just like a quick little knee surgery, and that turns out to be a season-ending surgery for a torn meniscus, which I mean, I guess he was just experiencing discomfort and told them that, and then turns out he had torn meniscus. So that's like the most Minnesota sports thing that could have happened to the Vikings' first-round pick. So hopefully JJ McCarthy comes back and is healthy next year. And Jordan Addison suffered a lower body injury going up for a contested catch. He hobbled to the cart, got carted off. I think the immediate reaction was, oh my God, like there he goes. But we've kind of seen maybe it's not so serious. I don't really know the full extent of it right now. So we won't get too much into the Jordan Addison of it all, other than just acknowledging it happened. But I think what we care about really is the JJ McCarthy news as it relates to Justin Jefferson. I know I at least talked about in one of our storyline shows that I really would like to see JJ McCarthy win this job this year. And now we are stuck with Sam Darnold, or as one of you mentioned before the show, maybe like Derek Carr gets traded because Minnesota seems interested. Like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I saw a random trade rumor on Twitter before this said that, so I'm not going to take that to heart till I see someone important saying it. I mean, at the end of the day, and in my opinion, it doesn't matter what happens with Justin Jefferson. He had almost 1,000 yards last year. He did a lot of that with backup quarterbacks, and he did that in 10 games. Still one of the best. Still in my top 4. I'm not really going to drop him out of my wide receiver rankings. I know some people are starting to move A.J. Brown ahead of him, and A.J. Brown's a very, very good wide receiver, but Justin Jefferson is in a world of his own, and you can only discount the situation so much when the guy is surrounded by, I mean, week 1, like 14 targets is not an insane thing if Jordan Addison is out as well. There's no TJ Hawkinson. They're rolling out Oliver at tight end, Johnny Munn at tight end, Jalen Naylor. I mean, it's not a good setup for anybody else other than him and likely Aaron Jones there. And Kevin O'Connell has been a really good offensive coordinator or head coach who calls the offensive plays.
Yeah. Johnny, we're not going to have to worry about figuring out a time for Dalton's mic. It's already happened. I just added to the rundown 4-minute mark. We're going to go clip that, get that out there. Dalton's squeaky mic. But yeah, I mean, I have Jefferson, I think 5th right now. I'm not going to move him, but it just feels a little bit worse that he doesn't have the upside of what I think is a better quarterback taking over later in the season, because it's preseason. I know there's a lot of bad quarterbacks who show out in preseason, but JJ McCarthy looked the part more in preseason than I ever remember Sam Darnold looking the part against any type of NFL defense. So was excited for that for like 5 seconds, and now I'm disappointed. And yeah, you're right. If there's no Hawkinson, which I would be pretty shocked if he played week 1. I mean, his ACL injury was like week 16. It was pretty late in the game. So yeah, we might be seeing, and depending on Jordan Addison, maybe it's not super serious, but I mean, week 1 is less than a month away, which is crazy to think about. So even if it's pretty minor, he may either not play week 1, maybe he's just not quite himself. We'll kind of see what happens with that. But we may be getting a lot of Justin Jefferson and a lot of Aaron Jones week 1.
And I'm okay with that. I mean, that's the recipe for this offense.
Yep, agreed. Jahmyr Gibbs has a hamstring injury. It is reportedly not too serious. What I've seen from Jordan Schultz is that he should be ready for week 1. Dalton, it's a little bit stressful, even though he should be ready. It's a little bit stressful to draft a guy who is dealing with a hamstring injury at throwing back position in the first round. But is this changing at all your feelings on Jahmyr Gibbs in drafts?
Not really. In the grand scheme of things for me, hamstring injuries can be scary, but it's so hard to tell if teams are being safe with some of their better players right now. And I'm gonna go on the side of confidence in that coaching staff and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, more importantly, if it was a severe hamstring injury, I think that coaching staff would at least be a little more upfront about his week 1 availability. I'm certainly.
Well, I mean, maybe we don't know that for sure.
But I'm certainly not going to reach for him in drafts at this point. But
yeah,
at cost.
The fact that the reports so far are mainly just, we're being very cautious. Like that's the message the Lions are pushing out there. So at least that's good, and I'm hoping that can take that to the bank. We do have a question from Quinn Lenardi here. At pick 10 in a 12-man PPR, Jonathan Taylor or Jahmyr Gibbs, even without the hamstring or any of that, I'm taking Jonathan Taylor pretty easily on this one.
Yeah, I'm taking Jonathan Taylor, especially with Josh Downs likely to miss some games. They're going to need someone else to do some of the short work. And last year under Gardner Minshew, the Colts ran the most plays and the fastest pace of play in the NFL, and I expect that to only increase with Anthony Richardson. So you just get way more opportunity for fantasy points. And there's still a good shot at pick 14. Gibbs comes back to you, so I think you could end up luckier for both.
Maybe. I haven't done enough drafts, I guess, but that would be surprising to me if Gibbs is slipping into the early second round. Maybe the hamstring concerns will make that possible. And at that point, I would like it. I think what I would say about just the difference between JT and Gibbs is, even without the injury, is JT, you're looking at 3 down workhorse like that. We know that's going to be his role every time he's healthy. Like that is Jonathan Taylor. Jahmyr Gibbs, I love him. He's a great player, but David Montgomery is still, he's at least going to be a 40% guy. And in reality, it's probably going to be a 50-50 because that is how you should use this backfield.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that as well. You're getting a workhorse, and I like to take my workhorses before some of these guys who are explosive and can win you weeks, but they can just lose you weeks on low touch volume and a lack of efficiency to it.
Yeah. Okay, Hollywood Brown suffered and I'm going to do my best here, guys, sternoclavicular injury, which is just a collarbone injury. He in his one play in the preseason so far, he is out for the 6 weeks, which probably means he'll miss week 1. The Chiefs have not said that, so I guess it's possible, but the Chiefs may not say that until an hour before the game because that's kind of how the Chiefs roll. So he may miss week 1. He may even miss another game or 2, or he just may not be himself for another game or 2. You know, the bottom line is at least the first couple of weeks, you're going to get injured and maybe just not out there at all, Hollywood Brown. So I guess the first place to start is just looking at the receiver room. And I think we know the guys to look at here. Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy. Like, Dalton, we just had the debate about the Chiefs receivers last week. And you have Rashee Rice, whatever, wide receiver 23. And I don't know if I'm going to quite bump him that high, but I am closer to you now than I was a week ago after this injury. He should for sure move up in ranks in ADP. I think he already is, slowly but surely. And then Xavier Worthy now has an interesting opportunity for a bigger role than I think he would have had, obviously, in week 1.
Yeah, it comes with the news today that Matt Nagy came out and said that they're going to utilize Worthy more than they did Rice last year, and that Worthy's kind of ready to get involved with the offense.
Yeah,
They're not going to overuse him.
I do just want so not utilize him more as in more targets necessarily, just utilize him more as in more different ways. Whereas we've talked about Rashee Rice was like, get this man the ball within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage and let him run, especially in the first half of the season.
Yeah, and then on that, there have been a ton of deep shots coming out of Chiefs practice. I'm not really weighing that a ton, but the initial report was Justin Watson will roll out with the starters. It'll likely be Rice and Worthy. Coming up next with some rotation between, I'm assuming, Worthy and Sky Moore or whoever else makes this Chiefs roster.
Yeah. Justin Ross has had a very good camp.
He has. It's hard for me to really put Worthy anywhere higher than like wide receiver 32 in my rankings before I'm over-indexing on this injury because he's a rookie in an Andy Reid offense that takes time to adjust to, and Hollywood Brown's going to be back by like week 3.
Yeah.
So I'm not really bumping him up my boards, and I can't bump Rashee much higher. So I'm not really adjusting any of my Chiefs shares for that. And I would buy the discount on Hollywood Brown because this is an injury that once they're back, they're back. It doesn't nag people like a hamstring or an ankle or a lower body injury.
Yeah.
And we can confidently, if you're getting him at wide receiver 46 or so, is where I saw his latest underdog move from establish the run. I would be grabbing that up as much as I can.
Yeah, because at that point, you're obviously not taking him as a starter. And especially depending on your league's rules, if you have IR in your league, just draft him, move him to IR, and then just, waiver wire somebody else, some random receiver, and you'll have a pretty nice boost potentially to your team. Because none of this changes my season-long opinion of Hollywood Brown, I think, is going to be the number one guy in this offense. I know you have Rashee Rice, but it's not that big of a difference, even if you think Rice is going to be the top guy.
Yeah, and then not talked about here yet, but Travis Kelce, continue to draft him in the early third, late second. I mean, this could just be more targets for him and not more targets for Worthy or Rashee Rice.
Yeah, from an entire offense perspective, I don't want to say concerned because that would be incorrect, but it is just a bummer because I think this does make it less likely that the Chiefs just come out guns blazing and like hitting deep shots left and right weeks 1 and 2. And, maybe it takes a little bit longer because there's a ramp up period for Hollywood and they've got to build chemistry, all of that stuff. So it maybe like dings the upside for Mahomes ever so slightly, not enough to like change where I am ranking him, but enough to where like if you could use that as a tiebreaker realistically between him and Lamar or him and Josh Allen, if you as the drafter have all those guys like tied basically.
Well, and the biggest bummer is the Chiefs roll out the Bengals and the Ravens to start the season, which are going to be two of the tougher defenses they face. And you're going to be without what we think could be the wide receiver 1 on this offense.
Yep. Agreed. If you're in a graveyard league, which I am this year, which means you can pick one player, you can pick players, but you can only use them one time. Like you have the entire player pool. You can only use them one time a year. Or if you're doing DraftKings, like I think Rashee Rice is a pretty nice DraftKings spot week 1. Pretty nice play in those types of formats week 1. All right. Tyrone Tracy, another guy who we thought was dead after the initial report that he suffered an ankle injury, was carted off. Turns out it was only a low ankle sprain. Don't need to talk about this too much. Just want to make you all aware of the update. If you've seen it, Tyrone Tracy maybe at some point this year will be a factor in that Giants backfield still. We'll see.
Yeah, I was already lower on Tyrone Tracy than I was Eric Gray. Like I said a couple episodes ago on him, it reminded me a lot of like the Kenneth Gainwell and a lot of the Memphis backs we've gone through where people like, he used to play wide receiver and now he's a running back. How cool is that? That's not cool. It's not good. But more importantly, did you see Eric Gray's juke for his touchdown in the preseason game?
I knew we couldn't make it the whole show without preseason highlights coming up.
It was just filthy. It was such a good move. And then he went to the house with it. And I mean, if you were drafting Tyrone Tracy and you're legitimately upset with this, like you need to touch some grass. You need to touch some grass.
I've seen multiple people who have large shares of him and underdogs. So there's people out there. All right. Tucker Kraft is back in 11-on-11 drills for the Packers. The tight end had a pec injury this offseason he was dealing with. He says he should be healthy by the start of the season. I think really just why this is relevant is we're probably not going to get any Luke Musgrave solo games at tight end to start the season, which is a bummer. But, I think we expected this, but just, worth noting, I think.
You know why it's even more relevant? Now the Packers can run 12 personnel and make us more irritated with what wide receivers they're putting in. Their starters had 3 snaps in the preseason game. They ran a different combination of wide receivers out every snap. And we'll talk about this more later because we're going to talk about one of those players.
Well, did you see what LaFleur said?
No.
He said something along the lines of when he sees people call one of the guys and one of those receivers the wide receiver one, or like asking who's the wide receiver one, he wants to vomit because we have 4 wide receiver ones, or like something to that effect. And it was like, oh my God, man, please just throw us one bone.
It's going to be frustrating. And I mean, they're going to run 12 personnel because that's how the Shanahan disciples do it. So there's going to be even less involvement of these wide receivers. But maybe we can find a little gem in the rough. Can you guys hear him?
Yeah. Let him in. He just wants to be pet.
No, he'll just sit next to me. He wants food.
Oh, okay. In Green Bay, still Marshawn Lloyd has a hamstring injury, and right now there is no timetable for his return. Now, that doesn't mean he's out indefinitely, just that there's no timetable as of right now, but just maybe pump the brakes a little bit on Marshawn Lloyd hype because of that, and there are other factors at play, just ball security and
he's fumbled 3 times in practice before his injury, and this is important because his career fumble rate is like once a game almost. It's pretty absurd. Yeah,
we'll talk a little bit more about Marshawn Lloyd in a future episode. I'll just leave it at that. Last thing is Jamar Chase was not at practice on Tuesday. I could not find if he was at practice today, so don't know about that. But he hasn't practiced at all in camp, but it was the first day he was not actually physically there. Again, I don't know what we're supposed to do with that, but everyone talks about Brandon Ayuk, which, I mean, God, I do not tweet about Brandon Ayuk unless you're telling me he is re-signing or he's traded. Please. We all know the Steelers want him. We all know he's watching practice. My God. Anyway, know about Ayuk.
I heard today the Steelers were in talks with the 49ers to get Brandon Ayuk as long as Devontae Adams was traded to the 49ers, but the Raiders wanted compensation of Debo back, and so they're at a stalemate of
it. And CeeDee Lamb, also another contract holdout concern. You can just I think Jamar Chase has kind of flown under the radar a little bit in those talks. So you can at least just throw Jamar Chase in that bucket and just a situation to monitor over the next couple of weeks. Again, the first game is September 6th. It is August 14th, maybe 15th or 16th when you're listening to this. So, I mean, we're getting there.
Ready for some sleepers and breakouts?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if you had anything to add on Jamar Chase before we...
I really don't. I don't care that he's sitting out of practice. He needs to play. He's going to play. And they're not.
So you're telling me T. Higgins is not going to be wide receiver 3 for the whole season as Joe Burrow's wide receiver 1?
I actually investigated T. Higgins as a breakout for this episode and did it. But I did find a really fun stat. He's only played 65% of the team's total snaps since he arrived in Cincinnati, which is a pretty wild number.
Well, because he gets hurt every year. That's why.
Yeah. It's just wild that that this guy is going into year 5 and he legitimately has played less than 3/4 of the team's snaps.
He's like less injured Mike Williams. He gets injured a lot. He's going to miss time. And, similar type of receiver. But he just hasn't had he doesn't get hurt in the same way, and he doesn't have as serious of it. Like he hasn't had torn ACLs, hasn't like Mike Williams break his back, break bones. He hasn't had as serious of injuries, but it's this is a big guy, gets hurt every year. You can count on him missing.
What here, Evan?
You can count on him missing 3-4 games a year. It's just as someone who's had T. Higgins literally his entire career in the NFL on a fantasy team, it just is what it is. You just got to pencil him in. He's the James Conner of running back, of receivers.
Let's
Also,
keep his name out of your mouth.
All
He's later in this episode.
right, Johnny, I'm gonna boot you down to the bottom. If you have something to say, just let me know. We'll add you back to this. Dalton, we've got sleepers, we've got breakouts. Which one do you want to start with first?
Well, I went ahead and pulled up last year's, and I want to talk about it because you and I were actually electric with it.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I see. I thought so.
We each had what I would call one miss, and I had one that I would just say is goes neither way. So your sleepers killed it, Evan. Super proud of you here.
Thank you.
Zay Flowers ended up being wide receiver 28, really came on second half of the season.
And he had to have been going like in the 40s at least.
Yeah. And Jalen Warren, who had a really impressive season. And,
I really wanted to put him on this list again today, too.
Oh, that's hilarious. I had Nico Collins, which
Nice.
That's a pat on the back, and Anthony Richardson, which I'm calling an even because he died.
I mean, you can't do anything about injuries. When the guys get hurt, that's just how it goes.
Our breakouts, we went 1 for 1. So you had Isaiah Pacheco, who he was top 12 RB when he was on the field, finished top 12 in points per game. And then you had Jahan Dotson, who, so everybody knows, Matt Harmon made it a point to stop talking about him on the podcast halfway through the season, not because of Jahan Dotson, but just because of how it was going. So,
you know what's funny? I had Jahan Dotson's name typed on the stock and deleted it, not remembering that I picked him last year.
And my breakouts, equally spurned by the Washington Commanders. I had Antonio Gibson. Rest in peace.
Tough. That's tough. Lost his starting job too soon.
And then my other breakout was Brandon Ayuk, who ended as wide receiver 12 or 13. So I feel pretty good about that one. So last year we were pretty on the money with these. And I think
I feel like I remember giving you a hard time a little bit for not like fully cheating, but a little bit cheating with Ayuk as a breakout. But he did have his best season as a pro. So like the call worked out.
I do remember saying he was going to be like a top 8, so I did kind of whiff on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not really. Like top 8 and 13, 12, whatever he finished, like whatever, same thing. You drafted him at wide receiver 18. You're thrilled. You're thrilled to get that.
Well, you want to start with the sleepers? We'll start where I went past round 10 for my sleepers. Not that you had to, but I just went deeper on some of these guys.
I don't even know like what rounds. I looked more at just position ranks when I was doing these. But yeah, I tried to go a little bit deeper. I actually went with 2 receivers on this one. But you go ahead.
I have a receiver and the quarterback, and please just understand. I know the history of this player. I know the things I've said in the podcast about this player.
Oh, I'm excited for this.
First, let's just talk about the QB position as a whole.
Okay.
Because it's important for this.
Okay.
Everybody's kind of gotten on board with this Konami code quarterbacks, which are like the rushing quarterbacks who just give you a solid floor.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Jaden Daniels, I think, is going too high right now. But it's made it really hard to get a good edge in fantasy. Like the rushing quarterbacks are just being drafted where they're going to finish for the most part. And then the pocket passers drop a little bit. So you can still go late quarterback and get good players. But
before you say his name, you can do your spiel, but before you say his name, let me guess because I think I know who this is.
But this guy has Konami code upside. He has everything we want from him. He's being drafted outside the top 20 quarterbacks. And he's in an offense that historically hasn't been great, but I think this year projects to do pretty well.
Okay, so
and
initially
he may not be the starter.
Oh, okay. Now I know who it is. Initially, so I'll tell you where I went there. Initially, I was like, oh, Justin Herbert. Dalton's going to do a Herbert thing like he's QB 19, and what if he plays the whole year? And then I was like, oh, is this Daniel Jones? And then, it's Justin Fields.
It is Justin Fields. So let me just preface this with, you can basically get him for free. Today, he played some reps at wide receiver. Not. I'm sorry. I'm not messing with people. This is a legitimate call here. And part of the Justin Fields formula is that if you look at Arthur Smith's offense, you look at the Steelers' schedule, and you look at what Russell Wilson does, there's a really quick path to Russell Wilson not getting that full-time starter job. And by week 9 or 10, Justin Fields is in there as the guy. So Arthur Smith historically has loved to throw the offense into the middle of the field. Throughout his career, Arthur Davis has had 37% of the pass plays go in the middle of the field between the 11 and 20-yard range.
I think if his name was Arthur Davis, I'd like him a lot better, actually.
Arthur Smith. In that same time range among qualified quarterbacks, this is out of 40, and this is from Pro Football Reference, Russell Wilson threw the least amount of passes in the middle of the field and between the 11 and 20-yard range.
Because he's terrified. He's terrified to throw in any kind of tight window.
And it fits the archetype we know for Wilson. He's a deep bomb or he'll dump it off. That's what he was last year. Last year, Russell Wilson had like almost a resurgence year for what he was the year before and still got benched in Denver. The Steelers' defense is so good that they're going to be in a ton of games where they really need him to run the offense as Arthur Smith wants him to. And I just don't think that with the weapons around Russell Wilson, he's going to be able to do it. Now, I know Justin Fields was pretty bad last year. I was myself against the draft range he was going in. But this is an improvement to last year. DJ Moore is better than George Pickens, but across the board, when you look at the running game, you look at the secondary options in this passing offense, and you look at the offensive line improvements and the play calling of Arthur Smith, who historically is an offensive coordinator, has been really good. There's a really quick path to Justin Fields having several like top 10 weeks with his rushing upside. And if you can get him your last pick of the draft and your other quarterback is like Josh Allen, you can just sit on him. And then when Allen's bye week comes up, if you still need a quarterback, you could run the waiver wire, but you're wasting a roster spot by picking someone up like Sam Darnold and just saying, well, he's going to be my backup when I need him. And this is one of those, you're never going to start Justin Fields until he is starting. And when he starts, he's been a really productive fantasy quarterback.
So did you see Arthur Smith go on Pat McAfee earlier today?
No.
So I have some good and bad news for you.
Okay, let's start with
good. The good news is, and this is all in one quote, the good news is the first part of this quote goes, Russ getting injured certainly put a wrench in things, but it was more opportunities for Justin Fields. The bad news for this call is the second half of that quote is Russ has been back lately and it's been awesome. So I think at first I was like, oh, maybe Fields just get like, and then it's like, oh no, Russ.
Well, and I went and watched the preseason game, and like Justin Fields was still Justin Fields. He still held the ball too long. He put it in the dirt twice in a preseason game.
There's a play where he gets sacked where it's like, dude, are you blind? Like,
yeah, no. And so, like, fully understanding that Justin Fields is not improved as of now, at least as far as we can tell. This is more of an argument of Russell Wilson being an inept quarterback. And if this Steelers team gets to a point where their record does not look like a playoff contender, Russell Wilson, they can let go and not worry about re-signing him. But why not see what you have with Justin Fields? And if you get 5 games of him and he's your QB2 and he puts up a 30-point week because he runs the ball a lot, you're just better off from it.
Okay, but what are the leagues that you're drafting Justin Fields right now? Because in my mind, it's like, okay, Superflex, sure, like make that one of your last picks, or wherever, like one of the last quarterbacks would go.
Well, if I'm in a kicker defense league with the way this camp is going, with the injuries rolling out, I would draft him instead of a kicker or defense with my last 2 picks. And if he doesn't start week 1, drop him, pick up your kicker, pick up your defense. But I would have to go. I mean, if I'm in a like 8 starting positions, I would need it to be at least like a 15-round draft.
Well, I can't say I don't respect this call because it's going to either make you look incredibly smart or incredibly dumb. There's really like this is going to either be, wow, the QB 29 was the QB 12. What a call by Dalton. Or, oh, Dalton called this guy a sleeper and he played 1 game. He never started.
Or you didn't even look behind door number 3.
He is my receiver 3.
Is Taysom Hill. And he finishes his QB 10 but never starts a game.
Can we, instead of receiver, can we just like play him at running back so he can get running back eligibility? Now that I'd be interested in.
I'm sorry, you want to put another running back in an Arthur Smith offense, take touches from Warren and Najee Harris?
Just Harris.
There we go. All right, who's your first one?
Okay, my first one. We will keep the Steelers theme, but this is Steelers adjacent. My first sleeper is Deontay Johnson, and it would be like if you would have told me a year ago that Deontay Johnson would be ranked low enough that he could be on a sleeper list, I'd say no way. He had to have like had a serious injury last season that he's recovering from, or he's like playing in the CFL and we're trying to count his stats for the NFL fantasy. Like this is pretty clearly the opportunity to buy the cheapest wide receiver one, maybe the cheapest wide receiver one on a team in fantasy football. And this is not, well, I take that back. Like the Bill, maybe there's a couple, but it's one of the cheapest, and he's definitely the best. He's the best of this group of guys, like outside the top 36 receivers who is available. And the thing is, like, Deontay Johnson is an undeniable, very good NFL wide receiver. I understand how bad the Panthers offense was last year. I am actually not quite as gung-ho as Dalton as far as predicting the bounce back, but I do think they'll be improved this season. And the thing is, like, Deontay is just the unquestioned alpha in this offense. You look around and you've got I think 34-year-old Adam Thielen, who's still there. You've got Xavier Legette, who is coming off of a foot injury. I don't know when he's going to be back. He's like doing drills very lightly right now. And you have Jonathan Mingo. So I think like Legette, who is currently hurt and a rookie, is probably the best chance to earn a large target share, not to out-target Deontay, but to earn like a large piece of the pie. He's probably the best chance. And he's already hurt and behind the eight ball. And you look at Deontay Johnson just as a player, his open score, which is an ESPN stat, over the past 2 years is 94. That is the best in the NFL in that stretch. And what an open score is, it's what it sounds like. It assesses the likelihood that a receiver would be able to complete a catch if he were targeted. Of course, the if he were targeted part was a large part of the issue in Pittsburgh the last couple of years. And if he were targeted and if he were accurately thrown to was also an issue. And let's face it, that could be an issue in Carolina from time to time as well. But again, you've got old Adam Thielen, two young, unproven guys. You've got Dave Canales, who we've talked about it a ton. Look what he did for Geno. Look what he did for Baker. Can he do something similar for Bryce Young, a former #1 overall pick as recently, 2 years ago at this point now? Can he do that for Bryce Young? And then you just look again at Deontay, his reception perception scores per Matt Harmon last year, 81st percentile against man, 82nd against zone, 85th against press man. He is green on every route, which means there is nothing he can't do at the receiver position. He's not quite the elite of the elite at any one thing. He's just really good at everything. And one thing that actually really bothers me looking at ADP, this may be a short-term problem depending on what happens with Brandon Ayuk. But like I look at George Pickens and I look at Deontay Johnson. Pickens is wide receiver 28, Deontay wide receiver 38. Can you give me one good reason why those guys are ranked how they are outside of we think we know what the Carolina situation is going to be? And even then, can you tell me the Steelers with Russ or Justin Fields, who you just said is a sleeper, but it's still Justin Fields throwing the ball? Can you tell me that offense will be better than the Panthers offense? And of course, we think Deontay is a better player. Like I am flummoxed by that price difference specifically.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to go crazy on this because everybody has heard my Deontay Johnson spiel, but I didn't put him on this list because of that. But just to give people an idea of like how good he is, he had the 10th most targets all time over a 4-season span at 552, and he is the second highest target total of any season at 169. Like, and he's not a 32-year-old wide receiver. He's 27. He's still really young. And he is the unquestioned alpha who his career so far has been the ghost of Ben Roethlisberger and whatever the hell else the Steelers were rolling out for 3 seasons. Like it's been poor QB play. And just to like stack it on top of it, he's playing with Matt Canada. Matt today, Robert Mays on The Athletic said he interviewed a coach and they were like, we really wish Matt Canada was still in the AFC North because he was that bad of an offensive coordinator. And Deontay Johnson, and this is a bit of a wild take, has a similar last year's Nico Collins vibe, where there's a lot of underlying data pointing to him being an alpha, and he just hasn't had it, and people aren't taking him because of it. Except Deontay Johnson had an alpha season, and we're just discounting that at this point.
Yep. Agreed. Okay, who is your second and final sleeper?
I couldn't keep him off the list. I'm going to hurt myself so bad with this one. It's Dontavian Wicks. So
I thought about him.
It's okay. First of all, it's hard not to when the guy goes out there and plays one snap with the starters and scores a 65-yard touchdown against Denzel Ward, who is like a blue chip corner in the NFL. It's not like he was playing against backups. So that's already impressive. This is a offense that's going to score a lot of points. Jordan Love is more than adequate at doing that. The problem is
they have Josh Jacobs.
They
say nice things about him, Dalton.
They have running backs. And I'm not going to repeat everything I've talked about, but his open score was consistently high. He showed progress throughout the season. In the first half of the season last year, Dontavian Wicks PFF graded out as 30th in the NFL. The second half of the season, they had him at 15th. It's really impressive from a rookie. His draft capital, which has discounted him across a lot of things, is strictly because he had one bad season that was injury-filled. We've seen this change among a lot of wide receivers. He really came on. The problem is, like we talked about earlier with Matt LaFleur, we just don't know who's going to get the ball in this offense. Yeah. And this is just a bet on talent. I know Jordan Love has a weird obsession with Romeo Doubs and talks about him all the time. Yeah. And if Romeo Doubs was just like a little worse, like Matt Harmon has said, we could really position this wide receiver room around Reed and Wicks. And then there's Christian Watson, who's a problem. But when you read Wicks' reception perception, he is a player who can play at all three levels of the game. Mm-hmm. And God forbid, one of these receivers, not named Wicks, gets injured. He is the best replacement
for any of them
on this team. Yeah.
For any of them. He can fill in for any of them.
Except I don't think he can do some of the gadgety stuff Reed can do, which is why Reed is ranked higher in my ratings than him. But he will be the replacement, and he has the best path to get on the field in different sets as often as he can. So I'm betting on that, and then I'm betting that the cream rises to the top, even if it's going to be a rocky finish to get there. This might take the team another 4 or 5 weeks to really figure out that rotation. But I want to be on the receiving end of what Wicks can be in this offense, then watch someone else get him and just hold gold until they mine it away.
Yeah, well, a couple things. First, I mean, what's his price? Do you have it? It's like wide receiver 59 or something, probably, right?
Yeah, no, he's for free.
So, like, take a shot on this guy with one of your final picks, with your last receiver pick, whatever. And even if we don't get the takeover, if we get some spurts and we get a wide receiver 44 finish out of him, he probably had some fantasy relevant weeks. Maybe you weren't able to start him in any of those because you never knew when they were coming. But maybe somebody did get hurt for a couple of weeks, or maybe he did come on weeks 9 through 13 or something and win you a game that got you into the playoffs. Like, this is a guy that in any stretch of the season, whether or not it is because how the coaches deploy him, how the receiver room's health looks like, or just like if the volume comes his way in a random game when all those guys are healthy, like, he is a guy who can definitely be a flex type of guy in your lineup if things tilt a certain way. And so I want to be careful how I say this, because I don't think he's the best receiver in this room. I think Jaden Reed is the best receiver in this room. But right now, I think Wicks is the most well-rounded receiver in this room, which we kind of talked about as far as him being able to kind of step in for any of these guys if someone were to get hurt. Whereas, like, Christian Watson kind of can do one thing, and it's a very valuable thing in this offense. Like Romeo Doubs, he is kind of the outside X guy. That's just what he is.
He runs wind sprints.
Jaden Reed, well, he runs wind sprints and gets the ball on a lot of these wind sprints, which makes it hard for us to discern what's going to happen. And Jaden Reed is the guy where he's got some stuff on the outside, like, as far as like digs and out routes and stuff. If he cleans some of that stuff up, I think he can be the most well-rounded. But right now, I think Wicks at least has an argument. And that's a good reason to take a guy like this, in the last round of your draft.
Okay, I did look up his ranking on Fantasy Pros. I'm getting off of Underdog because he's higher on that, and I think people are sharper on that platform. Take a guess where he's ranked.
I don't think he's in the top 60. Is he like wide receiver 70?
He's wide receiver 67. Right above him is Troy Franklin. Okay.
Who's like wide receiver 5, maybe in Denver, is what we're hearing.
Like wide receiver 50 is Keon Coleman. I guess I get it. Jordan Addison's 42. Jahan Dotson's 59. Gabe Davis is 58. Brandon Cooks, who appears to be getting beat out by Jalen Tolbert, is 57. Like, I don't know. Those are some dud draft picks. And at least with this one, there's excitement. And the argument against Wicks isn't he's bad like some of those guys. The argument is he's not going to see the ball a lot.
Which we just don't know. There are guys every year where, so what happens every preseason is we talk ourselves into, okay, this is what we think is going to happen. So that's just, we have to kind of frame our analysis on what we think because we're going off of all unknowns right now, right? But we also have to leave open the possibility of maybe we're just wrong about how this depth chart shakes out or how good this team is. And those are the things that if they tilt a certain way, like guys can have mega value that we didn't expect. We talked about that quite a bit. You mentioned the Bills. You mentioned Keon Coleman. I'm going a different direction in this receiver room for my sleeper, and that is Khalil Shakir. This is the wide receiver 51 on Fantasy Pros ADP right now. I have him at 48, so I'm not like crazy high compared to that. But I do have him as the highest Bills receiver off of my board in my ranks. He is right now third on Fantasy Pros behind both Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel. And like, I get it. Keon Coleman is the exciting rookie. Curtis Samuel is an intriguing player and a guy people have been obsessed with for years. And he's really only delivered you 1 year that's actually mattered, which it was a good year, but it was 1 year. Khalil Shakir is the only receiver to be clear, of this group that has any existing chemistry with Josh Allen. And I think with a quarterback like Josh Allen, that matters a little bit more than like, I don't know, just insert random like Jared Goff. Like Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff. Because, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, those guys play so much scramble drill. And you've got to be on the same page, quarterback and receiver, and know how to do the scramble drill to be able to be as effective as you could be and kind of have those big boom plays. Like how many touchdowns, for Buffalo and these teams come off of plays like that. And I think Shakir is the guy who's going to have that connect, or the most likely to have that connection, I should say, with Josh Allen. And you look at last year, did you see the PFF piece that came out today that was looking at the best and worst quarterback to wide receiver connections last year in the NFL?
No, but is MVS first?
No. Josh Allen threw 56 passes to Khalil Shakir last year. 51 of them were catchable. That is number one in the NFL by 6%. The next highest was 85%. Now, I know part of that is how Shakir is used. He was used a ton in the slot. His ADOT was like 7.5 yards on those throws, but he also averages about 7.5 yards after the catch per reception. So he's good after the catch. And this is also just the guy who we both liked relatively well as a prospect. Good route runner. He's another one of those guys like a lesser Deontay Johnson in the sense that he's not great at anything. He's just like pretty solid at just about everything at receiver, outside of like he's not going to burn you deep probably. But I mean, just a solid all-around player. And I don't know. You mentioned Gabe Davis. I just think back to people ranking Gabe Davis as a top 20 receiver 2 years ago. And I know, we don't know how this Bills receiver room is going to shake out, but are we really just throwing our hands in the air and ranking all of these guys, 50 and below? And again, I have him 48, so I don't have him high, but it's like, I'm questioning myself a little bit with that rank. I think this is a guy that number one, I feel very safe with him at that price, that he's not going to bust and be a disappointment, and you're going to have useful weeks. And number two, I think there's big time upside if he does, if he is the kind of 1A to the 1B in this offense in the receiver room. Kincaid maybe as the one overall. Like weeks 8 to 18 last year, he was wide receiver 46, and that is with Stephon Diggs there, who of course was having a down stretch, but was still wide receiver 35 in that stretch. So like, I don't know, man. I just feel like he is the least exciting receiver of those three, and so he's kind of being overlooked. But he's a good player. I think he's a good player, good chemistry with the quarterback. And again, it's Josh Allen. Like, take a shot. Why not?
Well, this is the team with the most vacated targets in the NFL, losing both Allen and Diggs. So there's room for improvement. I have him under Curtis Samuel, but that's different familiarities. Curtis Samuel's best year was under Joe Braden, who's the OC. Yep. But that's not a knock on Shakir. First of all, like what was said about Keon Coleman was pretty valid, considering he did those things in the preseason game. He didn't separate. If you watched his one red zone snap, the DB was on him the entire time. And those kind of players can be fun, but they're way less consistent in fantasy. According to pulling up my Bills info here, Khalil Shakir was third in the NFL in first downs per catch, which a lot of people say is a really predictive measure of successful wide receivers. I don't know who was first and second. I don't have that data in front of me. But all in all, like, take a bet on an offense that we know is going to be good because Josh Allen's running it at quarterback. An offense that's going to work a little differently. And there's not even like Khalil Shakir has to beat out other talented players on this offense. He just has to be the best player on a very not talented wide receiver room. And if you had taken gambles like that with the Chiefs last year, you could have ended up with Rashee Rice. But what we do know is that he is a top 3 option out of the gate. I mean, it's MVS and then Mac Hollins. And Mac Hollins' favorite thing to do is block. So, like, I'm sure he'll be an annoying thorn in our side as a receiver in sets, but that's because he's a blocker. So I like the Khalil Shakir take, and I think he's going to have his weeks. And then there was this touchdown. Was it in the playoffs he had that touchdown where he broke like 4 tackles to get
against the Steelers. If you just look up Khalil Shakir Steelers touchdown, you'll see it. It's a great play. It's a great play. Okay, on to breakouts, which if you're wondering, okay, how are breakouts different than sleepers? At least how I usually think about it is sleepers are guys that you're taking as bench players, and they have a chance to be more than that. Breakouts are guys who breakouts are basically guys who they could be anybody. They could be starters, they could be bench players, but somebody who you expect to perform better than they have to date in their NFL career from a fantasy perspective, of course. With that said, Dalton, who is your first breakout?
This one's a little crazy, but I can't get off of it. And I know he's been in the NFL for like 6 years now, and he's had good seasons, but I had to go with James Conner. I mean,
wow,
he's being drafted out of the top 24 running backs right now. And part of this is a little preseason brain. I'm not going to lie to you, because Trey Benson looked terrible. I mean, he looked so slow in the preseason game.
He looks like a guy who is doing a lot of thinking and trying to figure out where he should be running, as in the clips that I saw.
And that's a huge problem. If the game comes too fast at you, you just can't be good. And a lot of the arguments against James Conner this season have been, well, Benson's the heir apparent. Like, this is going to be one of those rookie comes on later in the season. And I don't think that's true for a couple of reasons. First, I mean, James Conner was just really, really good last year. So he led all running backs in 20-plus yards rushing attempts with 11. He had the 6th most rushing yards last year at 1,040. He was a top 10 in first down rush rate. And on 200-plus attempts, he had a 5 yards per attempt, which is a career best. And then the last 3 weeks of the season, where he had Kyler Murray, he had 112 total yards, a touchdown, 133 total yards, 2 touchdowns, 203 total yards, and a touchdown. He was 7th in explosive run weight, and from week 10 through 19, he was 2nd in the NFL in yards per carry to only Christian McCaffrey. Like, we saw a resurgent, healthy James Conner, and then when that Cardinals offense got Kyler Murray back, they were the best rushing offense in the NFL, and they increased their weapons. They brought in a better offensive line. Like, it is hard for me to make an argument against James Conner unless I say, well, he's been injured before and he's a little older. But there was no sign of his impending age cliff. And there's just no sign that this Cardinals offense wants to utilize Trey Benson when James Conner was an every down workhorse last year and did great at it.
Yeah, so the thing with Connor, and I said it earlier, is he just gets hurt every year, and you just have to kind of pencil that in. I mean, knock on wood, hopefully not serious, but like 13, 13, 15, 13, 10, 13, 14. That's his games played going in reverse order. He played 13 last year, 14 his rookie year. And like, that just kind of is what it is. For a guy that you're drafting like RB 22, RB 19, somewhere in that range, like I think you take that. And if you said this in your stat list, I'm sorry, I was trying to look up his James Conner stats while you were talking, but I don't think I heard you say it. I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but he was among the leaders in like tackles forced per rush or missed tackles forced per rush last year, which that has not been a James Conner stat typically. And you mentioned a lot of yards per carry, a lot of other stuff. Like, I'd say James Conner, just eye test wise and stats wise, but even just eye test wise, that was the best I've ever seen James Conner look in his NFL career last year. I will say, though, for it to be a breakout call, I have to hold your feet to the fire a little bit here. In 2018, James Conner had just under about 1,470 total yards. So are you saying James Conner's topping that?
So I looked at last year because 6 years in the past, I did not go that far back. But he was the RB 13 in points per game, and I think he could be the RB 10 plus in points per game.
Okay.
And I had a fun question for you here because their ADPs are pretty far apart, but I think they maybe should be flipped. Devon Achane or James Conner, who would you rather have on your roster?
I think I would rather take Achane, and I have it ranked that way. I will say that if I take Achane, almost no matter what my team structure is, it's kind of one of those where I am going to be terrified every moment because I have Achane. But also, as anybody else in that league, if I am playing against the person that drafted Devon Achane and he is in the lineup, I will be terrified of, what I mean? So like, I think that balance is kind of why his ranking is okay to me. I understand the argument because even though Conner's going to miss games, just from a week to week basis, he was very safe last year, and maybe potentially more so with more stability offensively potentially this year with Kyler Murray, hopefully playing the whole season. So like, I understand it, and especially if you're going to go receiver heavy and you're drafting an RB1, there are kind of two schools of thought. You could either shoot for the moon, or you could shoot for a little less than the moon, but take a lot more safety week to week. So I think it just kind of depends on how your team is structured. But to that same token, like if you're taking someone as your running back 2, I do prefer Achane because theoretically you have a running back 1, someone you feel great about. And then if Achane pops, like you're probably winning the league.
Yeah, well, you'd have to take Achane as RB1 unless you went RB on your build for most drafts. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I think James Conner could outperform him this season if they both played 16 games. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, if they both play 16 games, I'll be the first for either of them, and I would be very, very happy for both guys. Obviously, Achane on a much smaller sample size, but he got hurt like every third week last season. Okay, my breakout, and this is a guy who everyone already thinks about as a really good player, and Garrett Wilson. But you look at his fantasy finishes, and maybe it's a little bit surprising. It shouldn't be because we know how bad the team is, but still just like the reputation of Garrett Wilson. And you go back and look, wide receiver 30 last season, wide receiver 19 as a rookie. And this is a guy who is wide receiver 8, I think, in ADP right now. And I don't have to say he's going to finish above his ADP to be a breakout. I think we're all kind of projecting that. But I do think that maybe there is a bigger chance than the general public is giving it that this guy finishes as like the wide receiver 2 this year. I think that's very much in his range of outcomes. Like I've listened to Ben Gretsch say he thinks Garrett Wilson is already one of the best 5 receivers in football. I've read Matt Harmon say this is this year's CeeDee Lamb, where he is on the cusp of elite. And if the quarterback play is good enough, aka if Rodgers is healthy and just okay this year, this is a guy who could go from very good to one of the 5 best in the NFL. So I think he's got that opportunity to do so. And I mean, like, I've listened to Ben make this point on a podcast recently. You look back at last year, I think some people might question the effort from time to time, or he just had just kind of some up and down moments on the field. And it was just possibly he was despondent at the situation that he was in last year. Like, he had to save his day with amazing plays a lot of times to even be fantasy relevant last year. The one-handed touchdown catch, I think that was against the Bills. He takes the slant to the house against the Cowboys. In that same game, Zach Wilson missed them on a bomb touchdown. Should have had 2 touchdowns and about 150 yards in that game. So, like, you look at his reception perception, 96th percentile against man, 79th against zone, and 93rd against press coverage. And really what this comes down to is, can Aaron Rodgers be, he doesn't even have to be pre-Achilles Rodgers. Can he just be like slightly above competent or just competent as an NFL quarterback? Because I think the player, Garrett Wilson, is ready to be one of the best 5 to 6 receivers potentially in the NFL. And just to give some context to all of those reception perception numbers, here is the list of guys who have cleared the 95th percentile against man. It's from 2014 to now. Stephon Diggs, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham, Antonio Brown, Devontae Adams, Allen Robinson, kind of a weird one, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Tyler Lockett, Terry McLaurin, and Garrett Wilson. And then if you look at guys who have cleared 81% success rate against zone and also have done that, which Garrett Wilson did last year, it is Stephon Diggs, Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham, A.J. Brown, Antonio Brown, Devontae Adams, and Justin Jefferson. I think you can kind of see the trend in that list and maybe where this player is going.
Yeah, and I think Garrett Wilson is a really good NFL player. And you've been higher on both good Jets skill position players than I have so far, in Brees being your RB1, and then now in Garrett Wilson being one of your breakouts. I am just so concerned about this Aaron Rodgers situation. And they went and got the carbon copy worst version of him by adding Joe Flacco as their backup. It's not Joe Flacco. I'm just kidding. Joe Flacco's in Indy. I don't remember who the backup is. Evan, you froze for me for a second. I'm back.
You froze for me, but I could still hear you, so you're good.
But I just really feel like this could be Aaron Rodgers' swan song season.
I think Tyrod Taylor looks like he's their backup quarterback.
I don't mind that, to be honest with you. Better than what they had last year.
Yeah.
But
better than Zach Wilson.
Yeah. So the two things that concern me about Garrett Wilson is the health of Aaron Rodgers and his ability to play at age 40 coming off an injury. And then secondly, we made a lot of excuses for this offense, valid excuses last year. We still have Nathaniel Hackett calling plays.
Yep.
And that's still a problem for me. And if we get into like the weird Aaron Rodgers buddy thing where he's not throwing it to Garrett Wilson because they're not buddies or something stupid like that, it's going to be such a frustrating season. I understand all the stats and the things I care about tell me Garrett Wilson's a really good player. My concerns around him just exist because of Aaron Rodgers and the weird career arc that man has taken the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's valid to be scared of Aaron Rodgers and what may happen because Aaron Rodgers exists in New York. So valid. Again, just going to buy the talent here, and the talent is like elite and screaming elite. So I'm going to buy it on that. Dalton, who is your last breakout player?
I feel a little dirty for making him this one. So I'm going to grab he's wide receiver 46 on Underdog and wide receiver 68 in redraft rankings. So there's a pretty big discrepancy. But I'm going to call his 46 ADP on Underdog to make this breakout valid. But I went with Brian Thomas Jr. here. Brian Thomas Jr. has been one of the rookies who's been a little quieter this offseason.
Okay, so I'm going to need you to explain to me, and not that I say people predict rookies to break out all the time. What exactly does it mean when you say a rookie is a breakout player? Because obviously we don't have past seasons to look back on for them.
So, like last year, you put Zay Flowers as a sleeper,
Yep.
and he finished top 30. I would say a top 30 season for Brian Thomas Jr. would have been a breakout season.
Okay.
So, essentially, at every week, wide receiver 2 starter for you. He led FBS last year in receiving touchdowns, first in his class in separation rate. I've said this before, I'll say it again. He ran like a very, very fast 40, a 4.33, would have been all the combine news had Xavier Worthy not broken the record. Difference is Brian Thomas Jr. has 80 pounds on Xavier Worthy. He's much bigger than Xavier Worthy, and he's a player who I think was limited in LSU in part because Jaden Daniels has his limitations as far as the route trees that Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. were asked to run were basically 2 routes, hitches and goes.
Uh-oh. We have Dalton freezing out. Oh, we have Dalton out altogether. Okay. I will close this one out myself real quick on Brian Thomas before we jump out of here. Oh, Dalton is back. Dalton, I was about ready to say about Brian Thomas that he had a play against the Chiefs in the preseason where it was a deep completion. I think it was Trevor Lawrence throwing him the ball, but I don't remember. It was a deep completion, and it was – I remember looking, I was like, man, that was good coverage by Jalen Watson. Great catch. I was like, oh, that was Brian Thomas. So, like, he popped on the screen when I was watching that game.
Yeah, and then he goes to a team, it's preseason, but Christian Kirk is not playing in 2 wide receiver sets. It's Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis.
Yeah, but come on, Christian Kirk is good.
I know. But I think he's going to see a lot of field time because I think he's a better player than Gabe Davis. I think he does what Gabe Davis does in people's minds, which is like stretch the field and effectively catch the ball. Yeah. And then the
emphasis on the last part.
Yes. The Jaguars are the 3rd most vacated targets. A lot of that's from Calvin Ridley. A little bit's not from Zay Jones. So they have an opening for it. And it's just a need for Trevor Lawrence, who has not had a consistently reliable downfield threat. No loss to Calvin Ridley, but he certainly wasn't the downfield threat they needed him to be. He's definitely a middle of the field player. And Brian Thomas Jr. can just do that. And so I just think that he's going to be a really effective weapon in this Jaguars offense that ran the 9th most plays last year. Like, they run fast. So I like all of those coming together in an offense that needs a playmaker.
Yeah. And, he was one of my early season storylines when we were doing the divisional preview, partially because it was kind of twofold. It was, how quickly can he kind of catch on and be a factor? Because number one, his own fantasy value, like he's a highly touted prospect, a very good college player. Can he be one of those, I don't want to say unheralded rookies because he's definitely not that, but one of those more under the radar rookies as opposed to a Malik Neighbors or a Marvin Harrison Jr. who you have to pay through the nose for. One of those guys like a Zay Flowers, who you mentioned, who you can take in the mid to later rounds and can be a big time value for you. And then number 2, like he can really open up the offense for an Evan Ingram, for a Christian Kirk underneath if he's able to play and be effective at some point this season.
Yeah, and I think that's what Jacksonville was needing. Now, if Trevor Lawrence will finally uncork the ball and start throwing deep, we could have a real good formula in our hands.
Yep. So my last guy, he's in the thumbnail, saved him for last. He's going to be my guy in 2 weeks. Just going to spoil that already right now. It's Tajay Spears. I mean, this guy was fairly productive behind Derrick Henry and the league's worst offensive line by about any metric that you look at last season. Like, would you be surprised if I told you he had almost 900 yards from scrimmage last year? I just feel like people don't really remember how productive he was last year. And
he really was, especially behind that Derrick Henry offense.
Part of the issue is he had 3 total touchdowns, 2 rushing, 1 receiving. And part of that, of course, Derrick Henry is the guy at the goal line. So that's number 1. And then number 2, like, touchdowns are just a little bit fluky. This is an explosive player, and just, the big explosive plays didn't happen for touchdowns last year. And I'll get to that in a minute. That is through no fault of his own. He finished 11th with the most receptions, or 11th in receptions for a running back last year with 52, almost 400 yards receiving. Again, only 1 touchdown through the air. I mean, this is a guy, he had 100 carries on the nose last year. He forced 26 missed tackles on 100 carries last season. Like, he showed his explosiveness, his shiftiness, and he ran for 10 or more yards on 13 of his 100 carries last year. I really wish I had this stat verbatim right now, but I heard a stat on Athletic Football Show about 2-3 weeks ago talking about the Bengals. I think Joe Mixon has fewer runs of 10 or more yards in the last 2 years than Tajay. It was, I don't remember what this, but it was like maybe it was 20 yards, but it was like Joe Mixon has had like 2 carries of 20 or more yards or 10 or more yards in the last 2 years, and Chase Brown's already had 3 last year. But anyway, this is a very explosive player, very good player. We liked him a ton as a prospect. The concerns for him are long-term. It's the knee. How does he hold up health-wise year over year? But he's healthy, by all accounts right now. And he is going, and I don't understand his price. He's going as the running back 35 right now. And I know, obviously, Tony Pollard is there. And obviously, Tony Pollard could easily rebound from what was a bad year last year. He looked better down the stretch. Maybe he's healthier this year, and maybe he is better on the Titans. And maybe he's just better because he's getting less volume, because I do think Tony Pollard is one of those guys who it's better for efficiency-wise if he is in a split backfield for his own just explosiveness. But, I mean, he's going at running back 35. He finished as the running back 35 if you include week 18 last season. That's behind Derrick Henry. Again, he had a big game week 18, but it wasn't like he had like 12 touches that game, like 10 touches. It wasn't like it was like, 25 touch stat padding game week 18. That's the only reason why. I just don't get the price. And again, they are saying nothing to give us any clarity as far as how this backfield is going to shake out. So I think it's very fair to have these guys ranked very close. If you want to have Pollard ahead, fine. I disagree. But if you want to do it, we don't know how the usage will shake out. But if he is the 55 to the 45 in this backfield, this is a top 20 running back, I think pretty easily.
Yeah, and I don't really understand the ranking he's getting. We were obviously big fans of him last year, and he showed a lot of fluidity in his movement, that ability to make people miss. Matt Waldman, one of the guys we trust, said he's like Jamal Charles light. And he did it his rookie season in an offense that wasn't getting things done frequently, an offense that at times Derrick Henry only scored 0 points. Like, they weren't playing good football. And you put that with a lot of his work he did at Tulane. He was second in FBS in forced missed tackle rate, which is a very predictive measure. And really the only reason he went where he went in the draft was because he has no ACLs. But this Callahan-led offense and Alex Van Pelt, 5 for 5, will be better than Mike Vrabel's offense, in part just because they have better weapons, because their offensive line is significantly upgraded with the addition of J.C. Latham, and they're going to have a higher pass rate, which is just going to give him lighter boxes to play inside of. And when it's all said and done, like, if him and Tony Pollard finish with a 50-50 workload, it's not ideal for fantasy, but Pollard did more with less last year. So I'm not too concerned about him like finishing as the RB23 on 50% of the touches. Like, that's a good outcome with his ADP.
Yeah, like we with how good the player is, just what happens if you take the running back 35 from last year, who is a very good player kind of hiding in plain sight, and you give him 200 touches instead of 152 touches. You give him 5-6 touchdowns instead of 3 touchdowns. Like, don't you think that's enough for him to at least warrant top like 25 to 30 rank at running back instead of 35? Like, I don't know. I just feel like the breakout case is very obvious. I'm a little nervous at how obvious it feels with Spears, but I just could not be more in on the player. And while the situation is not ideal, like, he's good enough to where I still think a top 20 finish is very much in his range of outcomes. Like, his high end range of outcomes, I think, is top 12. Now, that would have to require things going wrong for Tony Pollard and right for Tajay Spears, but like, that's in there, I think.
Is Tajay Spears this year's Puka Nacua?
The surge for Puka Nacua in 2024 continues, and it will continue into next week, Dalton. That is going to do it for episode 148 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube. Catch us live on there as well. Link to all of those things are in the show notes. As always, the show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all of that stuff. Thank you guys again so much for listening. We'll be back with Bus next week.